All right, first case. My name is Hank Balch. We're back in studio with our 2025 sterile processing quality improvement experts. We've got Marcy Konja, the Vice President for Sterile Processing Solutions at Specialty Care, and Gregory Agoston, the Vice President at Specialty Care as well. Talking today about one of my favorite topics, Gregg, beyond manufacturing, which we talked about a little bit on the previous episode. Specialization in sterile processing. We do not at all, even close, talk about this to the level that we need to, and yet it's like in our face every single day. So why focus on this topic? You got 12 topics in this expert series. Why did specialization make your list?
Yeah, so again, when we talk about the core things you got to have to get your quality goals and production goals, number of staff, proficient staff, right? And proficiency comes with knowledge, and by limiting the scope that we ask people to be responsible for, we can increase the depth of knowledge. So we're not as broad, but we're much deeper through specialization. And when you think about it, the OR specializes. They have nursing staff and technicians that specialize in ENT or urology or cardiovascular, orthopedics, etc. And granted, there's a little bit of carryover, but you can't expect the nurse that does or the tech that does the ENT procedures, and that's pretty much what their background is, to perform very well when you stick them over in the cardiac room because somebody didn't show up, right? It's going to be rough going. So the whole idea of specialization, I think it's valuable to take a little bit of a step back and look at, like, how did we get to this point in sterile processing? And it really goes back to the origin of why they created sterile processing. And I think we talked about this on earlier episodes, but it just hit it very quickly. Back in the 30s and 40s, sterile processing was brought together because sterilization was being done by these big, basic pressure cookers that required a technical person to monitor pressure and time and temperatures, and do that to make sure that things were sterilized. And that was typically the nurse. And they had these autoclaves set up all around the hospitals, and the nurses were doing that function. Well, the idea was, hey, we can consolidate this and get better quality by bringing it into one department. And at the time, the instrumentation was very simple. So, I mean, we're talking basic general instruments, like what you'd find in a minor tray or a major tray. Very basic, because weren't doing all these procedures that we're doing that are very highly technical and very complex, that require complex and technical instruments. So we started out with that, and they thought they could bring these people in and then really kind of promote somebody from dietary to wash, clean and wash. As long as they had good supervision, they could do the job, and they did everything. Well, we've evolved, obviously, as everybody knows, very complex instruments, very complex procedures, but yet our model for sterile processing is pretty much the same. Everybody needs to do everything. And when you bring that to the equation, you get high variability because you've got high variability in the proficiency set of the technicians. Now, granted, if you're in a very small department, specialization is not going to work because you just don't have that ability to leverage your size to bring specialization in. And specialization we're talking about, if you think of your GI department, most GI departments have a group of people, 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever it is, depending on how big the department is, that strictly do the processing of the scopes. That's all they do. They do flex scopes, and they're not worried about every hand instrument in the hospital, right? Or loaner instruments that are coming in for procedures. But in sterile processing, we expect everybody to do everything, and again, it leads to this variation and leads to quality errors, and we've hit on that on past episodes. So the idea is the specialization helps to improve the depth of knowledge, even though we narrow the scope. Now, where it applies typically is going to be in SPD for minimally invasive robotic cases. That's a good chunk. That's typically, a third, a quarter to more than a third, approaching, almost 40% of the surgical procedures are covered by that. You put a highly motivated team in there with leadership that focuses on those specific procedures and also has a connection directly. So you train them up so they've got, at least one or two people liaison up to the OR. You can become very efficient in making sure the OR has what they need, and they've got a direct line to go to when they need help in SPD. The other area that lends itself, and we talked about this, was loaners, loaner equipment, and orthopedics or neurospine. Again, you may not have, you may have this person or persons who are responsible for that input output coordination of effort to make that flow more smoothly, and then a team that does the reprocessing, right? The actual decon and assembly process. So that's another area. I already mentioned GI, but depending upon how big your hospital is, I mean, you could specialize, depending upon how big the surgical procedure. But primarily, what we're seeing is orthopedics and minimally invasive robotics will cover probably 50 to 60% of all the procedures done in that hospital. Okay, and a lot of complex instrumentation included in that. So that's where we think that it directly applies along with the GI area.
And if we look at just the rest of life, Marcy, we shouldn't be surprised that specialization works. You're kind of getting your reps in, right? Like you can think sports, any sports you want. There's almost always position players. So your pitchers are probably not going to be your second baseman. And if you're looking at soccer, right, like your strikers are not going to be who the other guys are. I shouldn't use soccer because I don't know anything about that. But, like it applies outside of sports. We were talking about the airline industry before. But even if you buy into specialization, so let's say, hey, like, Gregg just made the case. We're already doing this usually in the endo GI space, and we understand why, because really complex, high volume, get that process nice and tight. You got some true specialization expertise going on there, which drives efficiency and quality to both higher. But you can buy that concept and still not implement specialization correctly or well or sustainably in your sterile processing department. So what's the best practices in your mind of actually how to do this right in a way that you get what you want to out of it, that it doesn't add complexity, it doesn't slow down and become inefficient, all those kinds of things?
Well, I mean, we offer these services, and what we focus on is making sure that we have a team of people that are highly trained, uniquely qualified, are interested in this service line. It can be orthopedics, it can be, as Gregg said, minimally invasive, and orthopedics are the top two. The vendor instruments coming in, knowing these instruments, like the back of your hand. We talked about it. Your analogy just now of a baseball team is perfect. But we have people come down from the OR, or come over from the OR, come up from the OR, wherever the department is located, and they'll be telling, how do you not know these instruments? This is the instrument I'm looking for. It's right here. It's right here. Well, you know that instrument because in the OR, you specialize. You specialize in ENT. You do some other types of cases, the majority at other times, but you specialize in ENT. I don't specialize in ENT. I do everything. I know every instrument. And sometimes that can be overwhelming. So there's hundreds of instruments, and I think sometimes, no offense to the OR, but sometimes we forget that, yeah, we know all these sets. They know all these sets because they do these cases day in and day out. But there's so much more that a sterile processing tech needs to know. So when they're specialized and focused, we monitor the quality. We have KPI that we handle and make sure we track. Competencies are built on these teams. They're looked at and trained over and over again. It's just they know this service line, and they can do it. I woke up one night wrapping a set, wrapping my
Mm-hmm.
pillow because I could do it in my sleep. That's one of the things that we try to build these teams, that they know their instruments more than anything.
Yeah, it's really, yeah, if anyone tuning in, if this is a new concept to, like, you're not alone. Like, it is a systemic kind of assumption out there that we're going to cross train, and like that's going to be so solution to everything is cross-training everyone to do everything at all times. But I do not any longer buy that as the solution to the kinds of quality and efficiency challenges that we've seen out there. I'm a huge believer in specialization. We have got to get better, specifically for these more complex procedures that we're alluding to, right? With the the GI scopes, with the loaners, with the robotics, all of those are just getting more and more complex. And specifically on the loaner piece, those are the trays that you can just get a random tray you've never seen before from a brand new manufacturer. It's the newest tray on the market, new IFUs, and you're expected to just roll with the punches like you would any other tray without that level of specialization that we're alluding to. So I think this is a really important just industry conversation in general, but also specific application, obviously, to the way we're training and growing our talent in sterile processing. So great conversation today. As we look forward to our next and final episode in this 12-part series, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We've been talking all over the quality map in these first 11 episodes. We're going to land the plane on some success stories, okay? What does it look like to implement all the kinds of things that we're talking about, from proactive communication to the liaisons that we've alluded to, again, that I'm a huge believer in that role and that concept in bridging the gap between SPD and OR. We're going to talk about all that and more on episode 12. So if you've come with this far, mark your calendar for next month. Come back and make sure to wrap up with us in that episode as we talk through some case studies. But don't wait until then to reach out to Marcy and to Gregg. If you've got questions about, hey, I want to specialize, you sold me, we've got big gaps, how do I start? Like maybe just on my loaners, or how do I start my robotics? Like how do I get this program up and going? That's why they're here, to help you do that out there in the real world, in the real world setting. So we'll have their email contacts that you can reach out to them, and make sure to contact directly through LinkedIn. And with that, we'll see everyone next month.